have a question that I don't want to take us off track, but I'm hoping it relates enough that you could answer it now. In the context of this, if I'm going to eat, let's say 2 grams per kilogram of body weight protein, and I'm not eating multiple meals, maybe I'm eating 2 or 3 meals per day, I'm certainly going to be eating more than the 30 gram threshold that was thrown around for a long time, that we can only assimilate 30 grams of protein per meal. Should I just not worry about that? Some of it is going to go towards the thermic effect of food. Some of that might be converted into glucose, of all things, through gluconeogenesis. So should I worry about this 30 gram cutoff? Because I think balancing the 1.6 gram per kilogram body weight threshold with number of meals, with the need to exercise and work and live my life and sleep, et cetera, pretty soon you run into bottlenecks where you just can't do it all, or you're spending so much time trying to focus on it all.
You can't optimize all the things at the same time.
You lose your mind and your body. So what is necessary in terms of frequency in if one is getting enough protein? And then tied into that question, is there any reality to this idea that if you eat 1 meal per day, or you're fasting and then you eat, let's say 200 grams of protein in a single feeding, that you can assimilate more because you were sort of protein starved? Is that a real thing?
So most of the studies with protein are after a fast, because to assess it with stable isotope, you have to be in a steady state. So we haven't observed that. It doesn't appear that fasting really kind of allows you to assimilate more protein after a fast. So this gets into a core of one of the things I looked at in my PhD, which is, does protein distribution matter? Because most Americans get about 65 to 70% of their protein at dinner, right? Breakfast tends to be pretty minimal protein foods.
Do any cultures actually eat a big breakfast and not a big lunch and dinner? I get, we all heard that was ideal. We'll get into circadian timing in a little bit, but does anyone actually do that? Steak and eggs for breakfast and then taper off the rest of the day? I
know German culture tends to have a big breakfast, but it also tends to be like sugary foods and whatnot. As far as like teleologically, I'm actually not sure about that. So if you look at that, and then you consider that protein doesn't really have a storage mechanism, right? Like people will say, well, lean tissue is a storage mechanism. That's like saying a house is a storage facility for wood. If the house is made out of wood, you could get wood out of it, but that's not why you build the house, right? Like you're building the house out of a demand. Same thing for muscle tissue. There is a free pool of amino acids, but it's very, very small. So when you consider things like fat, which basically has unlimited storage capacity, carbohydrate, a relatively large storage capacity, you can store 400 or 500 grams of carbohydrate between your liver and muscles. And then protein, which almost has no storage capacity. The idea that, you could make up for low protein at one meal by over-consuming at another meal didn't make sense to me. So one of the studies we did, and again, in rats, we took both groups were getting whey protein, so high-quality protein. They were getting the exact same amount of calories, exact same amount of, nitrogen, exact same macros. Everything was the same. The only difference was one group basically got kind of 3 meals of similar amounts of protein. Like dinner was a little bit bigger because we wanted to keep it somewhat similar to how people eat. But each meal was going to be over the threshold to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Whereas the other group, I constructed it so the first 2 meals of the day should not stimulate muscle protein synthesis. It should be under that threshold. And then the last meal was about 70% of their total daily protein. And so we had them eat those for 11 weeks. And I'll never forget this. This is how obsessive I became about it. Is there was 110 animals in this study, and I made all the diets, and I weighed out exactly every single meal for every single animal for 11 weeks. So I was in there at 6 a.m., I was in there at noon, and I was in there at 6 p.m.
I love it. That's a kind of PhD student that professors dream of. You must have been a dream student.